his bio, but the point that I want to make is when we did a conference a number of years ago on school shootings, it was very clear that fatherlessness was at the root of it. Other things too, but also fatherlessness. And as I was poking around, I discovered Dr. Warren Farrell, who wrote The Boy Crisis, and he was just so stupendous. And when we were putting together this conference, literally, he was the first person I reached out to. When you talk about the war on men, on boys, on fathers, you'll see why I felt it was absolutely crucial to have him. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Farrell.
Yeah, sure. She calls herself Karen Sigmund. I call her Karen Kent. Here's this sort of gentle, caring woman. And then she goes into this telephone booth, like Clark Kent. And she puts on her Superwoman outfit, and with her Superwoman outfit, she shifts so that the conference time can be somewhat coordinated with the Super Bowl thing. And then there's these possibility of nature interfering with this conference. So she goes out there and shifts the atmospheric rivers so nature won't interfere with us. So let's give this woman a big standing ovation. This is me in my beginning of my career. Gloria Steinem with the hippie. Ironically, my focus on boys and men's issues began with my focus on women's issues. While serving on the board of directors of the National Organization for Women in New York City in the early 70s, now asked me to form men's groups to get the men out of women's hair, which then opened my eyes to boys' issues, men's issues, and eventually, through my stubborn psyche, my own issues. And so today what I'll be sharing with you is a look at the boy crisis. An overview of this is the evidence for the boy crisis, causes, and solutions. Let me start, though, with asking you, think about whether you've ever personally witnessed in your family or schools or among your friends and neighbors, boys having more challenges than girls. For examples of challenges, maybe lower school grades, ADHD, a greater addiction than girls to video games, alcohol, drugs, or porn, and or belligerence, a lack of motivation, rudderlessness, emotional withdrawal, or reports of not suicidal ideations like females offer, but reports of boys actually committing suicide. Raise your hand if you have if you have identified with that. So almost everybody and a few people weren't paying attention. So from what I can tell, about 80% of you. But let's look at the statistical evidence all around us that I discovered when I did 14 years of research for the Boy Crisis book. I'll start with the US. The price of manhood is that when boys and girls are aged 9, they commit suicide about equally. Between 10 and 14, boys twice as likely. Between 15 and 19, boys are 4 times as likely to commit suicide. Between 20 and 25, 5 times as likely. By age 21, boys average 14,000 hours of gaming. It takes only about 1/3 of that time to get a bachelor's degree. In just 90 years, the female-male life expectancy gap has grown by almost 500%. Yet we have 7 federal offices of women's health, and how many on men's health? 0, correct. Sperm count?
Since the 1980s, American men have literally been losing their testosterone, with average levels declining by about 1% per year, along with declining sperm counts.
Of course, this doesn't just affect male fertility, but also the health of our female children. When one sex loses, both sexes lose. For the first time in U.S. history, our sons will have less education than their dads. Men's percentage of bachelor's degrees have declined from 57% to 42% in the past 50 years. It's projected that within a decade, it'll be twice the rate of boys. Why? Once admitted to the college, boys are about 10% less likely to graduate from college as their female counterparts. The deeper implications is with fewer bachelor's degrees, when women are ready to have children, female college graduates are not looking for male college dropouts. Or as some women say, just one more mouth to feed, or marrying down. The trend, a nation of more overwhelmed single moms, more lonely and purposeless single men, and more dad-deprived children. That's a three-way lose-lose. But actually, it's a four-way lose-lose. The fourth way, it's moms, dads, children, and America also lose. Fed Reserve Chair Jerome Powell recognized the problem with young males as a significant national problem on 60 Minutes.
The opioid crisis.
The opioid crisis is millions of people. They tend to be young males. It's a very significant problem, and it's part of a larger picture.
I mean, you seem to be talking about part of this generation being lost.
That is the issue. When you have people who are not taking part in the economic life of the country in a meaningful way, who don't have the skills and aptitudes to play a role, or who are not doing so because they're addicted to drugs or in jail, then in a sense they are being left behind.
That was March 10th, 2019. That's what I mean by a four-way lose-lose. Let's look at IQs. You usually think of IQs as sort of natural and stable. IQs usually go up 10 points for every generation. Males have gone down. Boys who are nearly 12 years old today are only doing as well as the 8 to 9-year-olds in the 70s on IQ tests. Take a look at this crisis is not just a crisis locally in the United States, it's also a crisis globally. All over the world, they have different terms for the boy crisis. China's women up, men down. Japan, herbivores and socially isolated. Europe, NEET, not in education, employment, or training. Sweden actually named it after my book. In 1 year in the United Kingdom, there were more deaths by suicide in 1 year than in all the wars since 1945. On a global level, the UN finds that boys have fallen behind girls in every one of the largest 70, and here's the key word, developed nations, especially in reading and writing, the biggest predictors of success or failure academically. So what are the causes of this? There are a lot of causes of the boy crisis, but many times we think of causes like, well, there should be more male teachers, or that we should cut back on recess. We shouldn't cut back on recess, or we need to increase vocational education. I have found that all of those are important contributors. However, they're the result of 5 primary or underlying causes of the boy crisis. Of these 5 primary causes, I'll have time today to focus predominantly on one cause, dad deprivation. But let me give you a little bit of an overview of 5 of the other causes. Whoops. I don't always start counting from 1 to 5 with 3. Number 1 causes dad-deprived boys. Number 2 is a half-century of belief that girls and women were powerless and boys' problems can be ignored because they'll become men with male privilege and power. Focusing on boys means neglecting the girls without privilege, and that's misogyny. Therefore, keep your mouth shut unless you are a misogynist. That's the message. That's the message I've received 1,000 times in talking about this from my formerly feminist friends. Number 3 is the purpose void. Men are less likely to be disposable in war or in work. Men are the disposable sex. Disposable in war and disposable in the hazardous jobs in the workplace. But there are fewer men needing to die in war, that's the good news, and fewer men needing to die in the workplace, that's also the good news. But this has also created a purpose void among young men that has not been dealt with. There's a fear of psychological attachment to somebody we may lose. You have a son who you want to go into the Marines, so part of you really wants to feel proud of him as a Marine or as a Navy SEAL. But the other part of you is preparing to the possibility of that role, meaning the loss of him. It's harder to psychologically attach to somebody we fear losing. Whoops. Last is our repulsion from males who complain. Karen was talking about this a little bit before. Okay, just take this, watch this. When a woman complains, men compete to be her savior. Because when we can fix her problem and save her, we get her love. When a man complains, a woman experiences it as whining. Women fall in love with alpha men, not whining men. When a man complains, a woman often loses respect for him. A woman can't love a man she doesn't respect. As for other men, men disrespect men who complain. The only gender open to men complaining is the gender that doesn't exist. Therefore, men shut up, and therefore, women can't hear what men don't say. Make sense? I mentioned that the number 1 cause is dad deprivation, so let me look at that. The boy crisis resides where dads do not reside. But this avoids a question. Why has the family fallen apart? And why have dads fallen out? Remember that UN finding I mentioned a few minutes ago? That the UN is finding that many boys have fallen behind girls in every one of the largest 70 what nations? Developed nations. Enough citizens of developed nations are able to survive that the government and the culture can afford to allow the freedoms of divorce and the freedoms to be a single mom. The freedom of divorce, just mentioned there, you saw that the father leaving. So oftentimes when there is a divorce, the result is dad deprivation. The other is single moms. In each year, 41% of mothers have children without being married, versus in 1960, 5%. Freedom from survival worries in developed nations gave us the luxury to not shame single moms. However, the children of the 41% of mothers who have children each year without being married are usually dad deprived. Among unmarried moms who live with the dad when the child is born, Those relationships last an average of 3.5 years. The problem is that the children often become attached to dad and then feel abandoned by dad. And the boy in particular feels left without a male role model. 2 caveats here. Few people work harder than moms, and few people are more overwhelmed than single moms. Many, many boys raised by single moms do well. For example, George Washington, Gerald Ford, Clinton, Obama, although some of them do become Democrats. Among other reasons, the family has fallen apart and dads have fallen out because of the portrayal of dads as ignorant fools. Homer Simpson we all know about, but we don't all know that that's the longest running cartoon of all times, still going strong, always portraying the dad as a fool. And then there's legal discrimination. In courts, it is endless. The man is considered to have to fight for the children, the mom having the right to children. And it's all around us in ways we often don't even see. This is a sign put up by the government in Dallas. Discrimination, when I grow up, I will beat my wife. For a government ad like this to be posted, it would have to go through about a dozen layers of bureaucracy and get approval at each of those levels for this to be posted. Let's look at inner city violence and dad deprivation. We have actually known about this since 1965 in a significant way when the Moynihan report came out. He was asked to do, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, for those of you who are too young to remember, was a U.S. senator, a PhD in sociology, and worked for both the Republican and Democratic administrations. The fear when he was assigned to do something that was more complex in its description than the Moynihan report was that he would be seen as a racist, finding that people were anti-black, because his mission was to study inner city violence. What he found, though, was a little bit different, very different actually, that inner city violence was a result of dad deprivation, not blacks per se. That is, in 1965, 25% of black males were dad deprived. People called them at that time fatherless, but nobody is fatherless. They are either dad deprived or not. In 1965, 3.1% of white males were dad deprived. Today, 72% of black males are dad deprived, and 36% of white males are dad deprived. As you can see, that's higher than the 25% figure that it was for blacks in 1965.
Say that again?
Yes, today, 72% of black males are dad deprived, and 36% of white males are dad deprived. That's the 36% is significantly higher than the 25% for black males in 1965. Women have women's centers. Men have men's centers. There's a special word for men's centers. The word for men's centers is what? Prisons, exactly. And prisons are basically centers for boys and men who are dad what? Deprived, exactly. Yes, men's centers are prisons, and about 90% of boys and men in those prisons are dad deprived. When I ran for governor of California, I went around and spoke to a number of prison populations, and that's where I began to see that 90% figure was actually a conservative figure. Okay, what creates, when I say dad deprived, exactly what do I mean? What are boys deprived of? What exactly is it encompassing there? The first, probably there's a lot of things, but the number one thing I've found is boundary enforcement as opposed to boundary setting. Moms set earlier bedtimes. but kids under dad's supervision get to bed earlier. Why? Dad's propensity to enforce boundaries, mom's propensity to repeat boundaries, kids' propensity to be willing to manipulate themselves around boundaries that are just repeated, but not being able to manipulate themselves around something where there's no excuse is acceptable. And there's a lot of, if we have time, I'll talk about some of the reasons for that, but I want to make sure I don't go over. Postponed gratification, the problem there is when you have boundaries that are enforced, kids have to figure out a way to be able to deal with the issue that's at hand rather than manipulate themselves around the issue. That is, they have to learn the beginning of postponed gratification. Postponed gratification is the single biggest predictor of success or failure. When children cannot postpone gratification, they can't achieve, they disrespect themselves, and they're rejected by others. Dad-style parenting, like roughhousing and teasing, also builds a bond. This is the second important thing, the bond building between dad and child. Dad-deprived boys miss that dad bond. Building a bond with dad by dad teaching by playing, by dad risk-taking with protection, by dad being much more likely to tease than mom, and much more likely to roughhouse than mom. I'll give you an example of some of these. Teaching by risk-taking with protection. And dads build bonds by teasing.
Hey, undercover, Agent Sanders. I've been telling you for a while. Sir, please. No, no, no! Pull over the car. Pull it over now. Look at the car. I'm not gonna ask you anything. Yeah, we got it. He's rolling down. Interstate 15. He's moved down. Pull over the car. Hey.
You get the picture. So let's put some of these things together. Exactly what does deprivation of boundary enforcement plus the dad bond deprive children of? It deprives them of postponed gratification, empathy, social skills, motivation, and identity. But it increases depression when they miss dad bonding, suicide, and addictions to alcohol, drugs, video games, and porn. Roughhousing, boundary enforcement, and bond building tend to lead to the most counterintuitive thing, empathy, that I'll explain more in a minute, postponed gratification, and social skills. Let me do a little deconstruction of that. The unconscious dynamics behind roughhousing is that roughhousing is like a treat. It's And kids obey because kids want the treat, just like a doggy obeys because the doggy wants the treat. So let me give an example of this. Let's say a dad has 3 children, say 2 sons and a daughter. And he says, okay, kids, throws the 3 kids on the couch and says, all right, your job here is to jump on my back and see if you can pin me down before I pin all 3 of you down, okay? And the kids go, yeah, Dad, that's great. And meantime, Mom is looking on and going, I feel like I have just one more child to monitor here. But she doesn't want to interfere because she sees the kids are having fun, but she just fears that the kids are likely to get hurt. She's only about 99% likely to be right. Eventually, the kids do get hurt. And so when the kids get hurt, oftentimes Dad says, listen, Jimmy, when we're roughhousing, you can't stick your elbow in your sister's eyes like that. You have to be assertive, but not aggressive. What's assertive? What's aggressive? And then he explains what assertive versus aggressive is. Half the kids half hear it, half don't hear it. So then the kids go ahead and do the roughhousing again. They say, okay, Dad, whatever you say, we want the treat, so we'll do it. But they go back, and do they do it? Nope, they forget about it. And they go back into being aggressive rather than assertive again. This time, Dad says, okay, I gave you the warning. Roughhousing's over. Maybe we'll bring it back, a few days from now, but if you're doing your homework, etc. But right now, it's all over with. So here's the dynamics behind that. When the kids experience Dad actually stopping the roughhousing, but not repeating the warning, but stopping the roughhousing if it's too tough, the kids realize that it's in their best interest to be sensitive to what might hurt their siblings. This plants the seeds of empathy. Empathy doesn't come because children are naturally empathetic. It comes because they're required to be empathetic and they begin to associate it with their self-interest. This is not just my theory. There's hard data behind this in humans and even in rats. Number 2, postponed gratification. Instead of the immediate gratification of winning by being aggressive, they have to develop the postponed gratification of being assertive. Because if they don't, they'll lose the big prize of roughhousing, the roughhousing treat, and they'll lose the prize of the dad-child bond. When they learn to be empathetic, and they're able to make these distinctions between being assertive and aggressive, this ends up with children having more social skills. Children who are assertive versus aggressive develop more friends, and therefore less isolation, less depression. They're more able to be exposed to being stimulated, having dopamine increase by the friendships, their friends' approval. They're more likely to be productive in school. These children are not dad deprived. These children are dad enriched. Dad deprived boys are boys who hurt. Here's the 4 main ways that dad-deprived boys hurt us when they feel hurt. They're much more likely to commit crimes. They're much more likely to deal drugs. They're much more likely to bully. And they're much more likely to commit mass shootings. Here are the excerpts from an email I received from a would-be mass shooter. Dr. Farrell, I've read your book, The Boy Crisis. My mother was a feminist when she was young and chose to be a single mother voluntarily. Not having a father left a void in my life and a hole in my heart. The Boy Crisis described my life so accurately. If I didn't know better, I'd have thought you were spying on me. Growing up, my mother never pushed me to excel. I developed an addiction to video games, which facilitated a life of increasing dysfunction and isolation, that ended up with me being a recluse. I also developed a porn addiction due to not having a traditional outlet to release my tension sexually as a teenager. All of this was exacerbated by being socially ostracized and having frequent and intense and vicious arguments with my mom. Into my early 20s, I was still living in my mother's basement and got heavily involved with 8chan and their neo-fascist ideologies. I interacted with the Aztec school shooter, and I myself had written a 52-page manifesto as to how I would carry out my own shooting. The boy crisis helped me make sense of why I became who I was. It was like a waking up from a coma. I decided to go and get help and have recently been diagnosed with schizotypal personality disorder. I've slowly been making progress at getting my life together. If it was not for you, sir, I think I would have eventually acted out on the beliefs expressed in my manifesto, as did others involved in 8chan, such as the El Paso shooter, Patrick Crusius, or the Christchurch, New Zealand shooter, Brenton Tarrant, had done. So I want to personally thank you, because I feel like you have saved not only my life, but potentially the lives of many other innocent people as well. Sincerely, Carlos. I contacted Carlos, and we did multiple Zoom calls. I got the president of the men's division of the American Psychological Association and Jordan Peterson to work with me. Jordan gave me a lot of good input. We've made progress, but we didn't create any miracles. I share this as an example of how boys who hurt us are boys who often hurt. Anger is vulnerability's mask. I'll go over briefly a second cause. The half century of belief about girls and women being powerless versus boys being the ones that have all the power. That belief has led to, as I said before, me and other people who try to look at what is happening to boys immediately being called a misogynist rather than hearing what is happening to boys and having empathy for that. But this is all around us. And the OECD did a study, and they found that when the teacher doesn't know it's a boy, the boy is 1/3 more likely to be graded higher on a reading test. We're surrounded with images like this. Boys are stupid, throw rocks at them. Besides this book, there's a whole industry around selling posters, t-shirts, coffee cups with exactly this symbol on it. Fortunately, I haven't seen any rocks for sale. We've developed a mom having the right to children, a dad having to fight for children. Even celebrities such as Brad Pitt had to fight for their children, in Brad's case with Angelina Jolie. The problem that I've seen in people contacting me is that dads with the money enough to hire me to do expert witness work often don't have the time for their children. Dads with the time often don't have the money. We have created a world in which basically we say moms have 3 options when their children are born, if they're married and in a middle class or above. Option number 1 is work full-time. Option number 2 is children full-time. Option number 3 is some combination of both. Now, I want to be clear that dads also have 3 options. Option 1 is to work full-time. Option 2 is to work full-time. And option 3 is to work full-time when they have children in the middle class or above. So let's work on solutions, what I am most passionate about. First is looking at a core problem before we get into the solution to that problem. One is, and that core problem is that when it's a woman's child, it's therefore a woman's choice. Dad involvement considered a mother's choice rather than a mother's choice rather than what is vital to the children. The rights of fathers is considered misogynist, as in fathers' rights groups or men's rights groups. But in fact, when a woman and a man create a child, they're actually creating three new things: a mom, a dad, and a child. We're focused in the world today on only the creation of the mother and her rights, and not on the father and his rights, nor the child and her or his rights. So what's missing from the abortion debate? Dad's missing. The dichotomy of a right to life versus a woman's body, a woman's choice, overlooks a vital win-win solution: a dad's right and his responsibility to care for that future infant. Why kill what we can love?
I'm gonna get you. I'm gonna get you.
This is my son-in-law clearly abusing the child. The abortion debate is missing a dad's ABC rights and responsibilities. No right without responsibilities. With abortion, the right to be informed immediately and to assume legal and financial, responsibility, emotionally and financially, signed by notaries, etc. B, a birth control pill, a male birth control pill. And C, the caring right, the right to equal participation in caring for the child. I'll elaborate on this a little bit. The creation of a fetus creates three sets of rights in tension: the right of the fetus to live, the right of the mother to have a choice, and the right of the dad to have a choice. What's been omitted from the debate about the dads is the dad's ABC rights and responsibilities. Abortion. Should the dad have the right to be informed immediately that the mother is considering abortion so that he may legally affirm he will care for the infant both emotionally and financially from birth to age 18? Should a dad have the right to allow the fetus to live and be loved? Does that trump the right of the mom to abort the fetus? B, birth. Should men have the right to have and responsibility to use a birth control pill or injections or the now in development non-hormonal form of male birth control? Male birth control should also be a women's issue. It frees women from only her body being subjected to hormone manipulation. And he can then share responsibility to prevent an unwanted pregnancy. The caring right. A pregnant mom often chooses to care for the child exclusively or put the child up for adoption, thus depriving the child of its biological dad. Should the biological dad have the right to be informed immediately that the mother is pregnant so he can take responsibility by offering his love and financial contribution to his child? In brief, the potential parents chose to have sex. To prevent the fetus from being aborted, should the mother taking responsibility for 9 months and the dad taking responsibility legally for 18 years become something we even discuss? Should we discuss whether a fetus being protected and raised with love rather than aborted with not only an aborted child or infant or fetus, but often a traumatized mother and an ignored dad? Is that a viable discussion? So I think dad involvement, when I was interviewing Democratic presidential candidates Andrew Yang and John Hickenlooper, They started to become very interested in this issue. And their campaign managers immediately approached me and said, this will lose our feminist base and it will lose our single mother's base. But we need to redefine father involvement as an issue that is a woman's issue as well, and a mother's issue as well as a men's issue. 49% of dads say they'd prefer to be home with their children than to be working full time. We have to look at dad's time versus dad's dime. Harvard University, in an 85-year longitudinal study, found that happiness happens when a family earns between $50,000 and $70,000 a year. After that amount, depending on where in the country they live, the time with dad helps more than the family having more money. That is, a dad's time is worth more than a dad's dime after that point. Dad-enriched boys are warmer, more mature, etc. Dad predicts worldwide the amount of time a father spends with a child is one of the strongest predictors of empathy in adulthood. The more dad, the less drugs. A new purpose can be seen in fathering. And as technology moves on, careers will very rarely last a lifetime. Being a dad lasts a lifetime. Scouting, boys' clubs, surrogate dads, finding coaches for your son, all of these are partial solutions to someone who does not have a father involved. Preparing boys for caring professions, just like we prepared women for STEM professions, is another option. Reviving recess, the CDC found that for each minute of recess, there is benefits children studying more than the additional amounts of time studying. Boys who do not have fathers are very much more likely to drop out of high school, but when they have a purpose through vocational education, they're much more likely to pursue that purpose. Checks and balance parenting. Moms. The solution to this is mothers and fathers knowing how to communicate about their different parenting styles. Family dinner nights are crucial. I'm running out of time, so I'll just refer you to the appendix to the Boy Crisis book, which outlines how to conduct a family dinner night so it doesn't become a family dinner nightmare. The biggest single Achilles heel of humans is our inability to handle personal criticism without becoming defensive. If the AFA got involved with any single effort, it would be training elementary school students and their parents to take this vital step toward reviving our family and our democracy or our republic via knowing how to communicate more effectively and handle criticism more effectively. We need to develop more laws inspiring fathers. In Florida, under Governor DeSantis, they've passed 3 laws that two of them received the unanimous vote of both Republicans and Democrats, showing enormous possibilities for getting fathers more involved in the family. All of them were focused on that. We need to let dads know they're needed and wanted. When Uncle Sam told men, you're needed to kill and be killed, men responded. It's a lot easier to respond to a mandate to love and be loved. 4 must-dos after divorce is equal shared parenting, a maximum of 20 minutes drive time difference between mom and dad, no bad-mouthing that the children can detect, and couples communication. These are all proven advantages after divorce. Need to create a White House Council on Boys and Men rather than a gender policy council that actually excludes boys and men under DEI pretense. Yeah, probably. The economic, we need to work on economic change requiring family flexibility. In the past, mothers have learned to row the boat only from the right side, raising children. Dads only from the left side. Today, mothers are much more likely to be able to row the boat from both sides, but dads still are more likely to be able to row the boat only from one side. The problem is that if a mom wants or needs to row from the left and a dad can only row from the left, the boat goes in circles. In the future, advanced technologies make economic change the only constant, increasing the need for a family boat with flexibility. With our sons eventually able to raise children as comfortably as our daughters now raise money. In conclusion, we don't need a women's movement blaming men, nor a men's movement blaming women. We need a gender liberation movement freeing both sexes from the rigid roles of the past toward more flexible roles for our future. For boys and men, that starts with redefining power. Real power is not being a human doing. It is being a human being. I started some 350 men's groups. A man who joined one of those men's groups shared with me that the success of his business had led to his failure as a dad, for both, and also as a husband. That he felt his business he did not own his business, but in introspection, that the business actually owned him. But the men's group helped him create his own picture to give up his business for 5 years to raise the son who was now in his new wife's womb. He told me that this was the best decision of his life, in essence, to balance being a human doing with being a human being. That man was John Lennon. Men redefining the meaning of power is our best gift, not only to ourselves, but also to our sons and to our daughters who love them. Children need dads. Moms need dads. And dads need to be dads. We all need each other. We are all in the same family boat. When only one sex wins, both sexes lose. Thank you.